In the Army, I learned that, as a commander, I would spend 90% of my time on 10% of my soldiers. That counsel proved true. During my tenure as a company commander, 4 soldiers in particular required special handling. One had a history of alcohol abuse. He was devastated when I revoked his orders for a career-enhancing school after yet another lapse of judgment. The second problem soldier was a young father. He left his toddler unattended one evening and ended up in jail on charges of neglect. The third was a true criminal. I knew I would be the one to put him out of the Army when our sergeant major said to me, "Sir, he's a bad person." The fourth soldier was my success story. He had married too young and came to my attention because of a tendency toward domestic violence. After a period of separation and counseling, he and his wife reconciled. The chaplain was very helpful in that process. At his advice, the young man began to volunteer in a program that helped disadvantaged people, and through that experience, he acquired a purpose and direction for his life. These 4 were the 10% who took most of my time and attention. How sad that only one of the 4 had a happy ending. Well, that's one way to look at it. But a better way is to join the angels in rejoicing over one sinner who repents, while continuing to pray for the others. God doesn't write off anyone, and neither should we. Not all come into the fold, but that doesn't relieve us of the obligation to try to bring them in. Isn't that what we would want them to do for us? I've often wondered why the misfits and complainers are so different from the compliant and productive. Circumstances play a role, but they are not the determining factor. I know a man who has been a quadriplegic for most of his life, and yet he's a devoted husband and father, and a well-respected pastor and teacher. Then there are others I know who have squandered every advantage and have become leeches and pariahs. From this, I conclude that circumstances are the theater in which the condition of our hearts is put on display. That's a biblical principle, as Paul explains. Whatever circumstance I am in, I've learned to be content. I know what it is to live with humble means, and I know what it is to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of contentment, both to be filled and to go hungry, to have abundance and to suffer need. I can do all things through Messiah who strengthens me. Paul, like my successful soldier, had gained an understanding of his purpose in life. For both of them, that purpose involved others outside themselves. It's amazing how that kind of purpose transforms complaining and rebellion into joyful solutions for the dreary problems of life. We can't escape the dreary problems, but we can choose how to deal with them. Here's one example of what not to do. The people were murmuring in the ears of Adonai about hardship, and when Adonai heard, his anger burned. The fire of Adonai blazed among them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses, so Moses prayed to Adonai, and the fire died out. The name of that place was thus called Taberah, because fire from Adonai had burned among them. The grumblers among them began to have cravings, so the children of Israel began to wail repeatedly, saying, "If we could just eat some meat. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt for free, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now we have no appetite. We never see anything but this manna." That was the turning point in Israel's journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. After a year of preparation, they had finally set out on an orderly march under the direct guidance of the Almighty. They had no unmet needs, thanks to the presence of food and water supplied by God, and the miraculous durability of their shoes and clothing. Their armies, led by God's commanders, kept all enemies at bay. They knew their ultimate destination, and they had capable leaders in Moses, Aaron, the tribal chiefs, and the 70 elders of Israel. The Torah God had given provided legal, spiritual, political, and social structure, and if there was any question about it, Moses would ask God for clarification. What reason would the people have to complain? Plenty of reason, considering the brokenness of our human nature. They were in a dry, barren desert far from any civilized comforts. They were totally dependent on God, having no choice but to trust Him. Even as slaves in Egypt, they had some meager control over aspects of their lives, such as what to eat. That, perhaps, may be the ultimate reason for complaint. Someone else was in charge. That's the basic problem with humanity. Since our Creator first gave us a choice, we have opted to go our own way rather than obey Him. We want to remake reality in our own image. And when we can't, we put up walls to protect what little illusion of control we think we have. And we devise schemes to expand that sphere of illusion. That's why some people resort to violence, others to passive-aggressive manipulation, and still others to living in a permanent state of offense. Even if society is well organized, peaceful, and prosperous, some people will be unhappy. Such discontented people will always complain and try to undermine the system. If they can't take charge themselves, they may be able to deprive others of happiness, and thus derive a perverse sense of contentment by sharing their misery. This is why we need a heart change. If we could catch the vision of God's kingdom, we would be less inclined to grumble, complain, and cause division. We can't catch that eternal vision unless we are part of His covenant, and that in turn means connecting with His covenant nation of Israel. Well, that in itself is reason for some people to complain. They find it strange and distasteful that Christians and Jews are partners in the same covenant of redemption for Israel and the nations. Rather than build relationships and find ways to bridge our differences, they prefer to remain separate, and thus miss the wonderful and unexpected ways God brings about His intent. Well, this is nothing new. Moses and Paul both dealt with aspects of God's people acting like the world and seeking to conform the kingdom to their own visions. Both of them understood that only divine intervention could fix that problem. Moses said it this way: "If only Adonai would make all the people prophets. If only Adonai would put the Spirit on all of them." Paul said the same thing in his exhortation about spiritual gifts. Pursue love and eagerly desire spiritual gifts, but especially that you may prophesy. God poured out His Spirit on all flesh so that we could catch the vision of His heart. The first step toward catching God's vision is to quit complaining and look for His presence in our circumstances. That's the best way to cease being disagreeable people and become people of vision.